I'd like to invite everyone who's come in to please step up and share with us. It's about getting to know one another, what brought you to the table and what you've been doing, what your concerns are, questions for our speakers, and what you'd like to get from our group of Wired Schools here. So who wants to go first? Virginia. Jennifer, if I may, and if you're not comfortable with this at all, but I've mentioned you in at least one of my videos, not by name, but as a dynamic mom in New Hampshire who had a son who is all healthy last summer, and then and you have essentially an EMF free home. Everything's wired, which is great, but he was happy and healthy and playing. And the first day back at school, or shortly thereafter, I believe you were telling me that you got a call from school that he was sick. You had to bring him home. And would you care to share that with us?
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for listening. Unfortunately, myself and my son both have sensitivity issues. So I myself became ill from EMF about 5 years ago. And so I, through, as Brian, you mentioned earlier, going down that rabbit hole, I did tons and tons of research. I discovered it was after our smart meter was installed in our home, and, around the same time we had Wi-Fi installed in our home as well. And at the time I didn't know the health effects. So just from process of elimination, doing my own legwork and investigative work, I figured out that, it was really the wireless that was making me sick. Right around that time, my son was probably, he was probably about a year old. And so by the time he was 2, he started developing some symptoms. So it was essentially, he wasn't able to sleep through the night. He was having some issues with headaches and stomach aches, and so we, fought with the power company at the time to have the meter removed from our home, and they didn't work with us. Unfortunately, they were just, that wasn't an option. So we got rid of Wi-Fi in the home, which definitely helped, but still we were having the issues. So fast forward, we had planned on moving to New Hampshire for my business. I am a small business owner. So we did that. Lo and behold, we have an analog meter. I actually locked up my meter to ensure, safety. Fast forward again, here we are 4 years later. And after years of, about a year and a half of, struggling to, work with the power company here in New Hampshire, they let us do a self-meter read. So we have the analog meter, we have no Wi-Fi in the house, I have a wired internet, we don't have cell phone use for the most part in the house. My husband has a cell phone for his business, but we turn it on airplane mode when we're not using it. But with that said, with all of the struggles I've been through of, maintaining this extremely healthy environment in my home, I send my son off to school and it's out of my control. So it's been very disheartening having to go through this whole process for sure. And I will say that, for the most part, I feel like people are starting to listen. It's been a long process for us because I've been at a school many times, doing lots of education, trying to, talk to the teachers about not just the health effects on the children, but on them. And, some people are listening, but for the most part, it seems to be more of an inconvenience for them. It seems to be something that they need to deal with, and they just don't have the time or the resources to deal with it. And so, as you mentioned, Brian, earlier, putting it back on, it's all about the children. Our children have the right to a healthy education, and we are not providing that environment for such things. And so we, as people here to protect our children, are not doing our job. And so I'm kind of putting it back on them, saying, it's up to you. It's your responsibility to be doing your job to protect our children and providing a safe environment, and you're not doing that. So, it's been a struggle for sure. they've made some changes in his classroom. They don't use a smart board. They move the Wi-Fi router out of his room. I use a device called Blue Shield, and it looks like this. Actually, I have it handy. So it's called Blue Shield. I don't work for them at all. I am not a sponsor, nothing like that. I'm not that sort of person. But I did a ton of study of all sorts of, there's all those pendants and, all sorts of devices and such. And I feel like through the years, I've spent thousands of dollars literally to try and find something that works for both myself and my son. And this tends to help him during the school day. I've tested it this year for the most part, and he's holding up a lot better this year than he is normally. So, between not using the smart board, between, moving the Wi-Fi router out of his room, having this device on him, and I've completely changed his diet for the most part. We're not doing gluten. He's eating very clean, but still he's struggling. I mean, here we are a great deal into the school year now, and, he complains of headaches. He complains of stomach aches. I'm getting calls from the nurse frequently, and, they're wondering what's wrong. And I said, well, I told you what's wrong. And, nothing's being done. So it's been a really frustrating road for sure. For the most part, I've been told by the school that he needs a proper diagnosis in order for them to do anything, in order for them to make any change whatsoever. And so, as you all probably know, there's there's really no proper diagnosis for this out there. A lot of doctors are unfamiliar with what's going on here. And so we've visited some local doctors, and they all, it's kind of a mystery. It's more me educating them about what's going on and them going and doing the homework. And then I go back for the next visit, and they say, well, thank you for telling me about that, but this is all new to me. And this is something that I'm still researching and I'm still figuring out. So, I feel like, again, going back to education, we are the canaries in the coal mine that are trying to raise the flag on what's important here, and that's protecting our children. And I feel like we are taking their future away from them by causing these issues. And these are irreversible issues, health issues that we're causing. Not we as in we here, because we're trying to do the opposite and protect our kids. But so it's unfortunate. I've been told basically that in order for the school to do anything, that I need to have a diagnosis. And so, I've been keeping a health journal. I basically tell a school that, during the summer he thrives, and during the school year he does not. He has all of these issues that come back, and on the weekend we bounce back, and on the weekdays he's sick again. So it's been a real struggle for sure, and I'm just thankful to have folks like you that are aware and raising awareness to others, and I think that's the best that we can do at this point.
Doctors, in general, they're not trained. Traditional medicine, as I understand, that the institutions are sponsored by big pharma and the drug companies, and they have no interest. They cannot make any money from letting this come to the light of day. But, maybe I'm a little naive, but what more would it take other than anecdotal evidence that, just do a little test, let the kid be exposed to all of this radiation, and then take them away. And the child, I can't think that they would, that they would lie. They can show symptoms of fainting or whatever. I understand many of these instances are going to school nurses, and they're not being reported back to the parents, and which I think is more than a crime. But, this just shouldn't be this difficult to do that. But Brian, did you want to touch on that at all, about what you'd shared with me about a doctor you met, a blood test or something?
Yeah. As for the electro sensitivity, I think I'm partially EHS as well. Specifically as it relates to my sleeping. Jen, I don't know if you have experimented with any of the shielding products, but I have this hood that I wear, and I'm in a RF shielded sleeping bag at night, It looks ridiculous, but I'm getting sleep. You know what I mean? But there's a website, Less EMF. I don't know if you've seen it or not. The stuff on there is kind of expensive, but you got to do what you got to do as a parent. And if it means shielding him while at school, whether it's through clothing or whether it's through one of those canopies, like, just do it, own it. Like, he shouldn't have to be sick like all day long. And like, yeah, he might get teased a little bit, but what's worse? I don't know. I mean, something you might consider, just because, like, you can't expect the school to pay for any of that, but I want to be an advocate for my daughter and her school. And slightly off topic here, but we shouldn't be sitting down all day. So when she gets to be the right age, when they start making them sit down all day, I'm going to advocate that she gets a standing desk, and I'll provide that for her myself. So it's things like that as parents that we think we can make exceptions. But as far as getting a diagnosis, I actually came across a PowerPoint presentation online, and I have it, and I shared it with Chris, so one of us can get it to you if you need it. But there's a doctor who basically came up with a series of like 4 or 5 different blood tests that can be used to effectively diagnose someone with EHS. I'm actually lucky enough to have met a doctor here in the DC area.
I think it's important too to realize that there's so many shysters out there looking to make a buck on these products and gadgets, and I really think we need to be careful. But like you say, to boost our immune system, to eat organic whenever we can and avoid the gluten, that has a lot to do with it as well. Do you want to share a little bit about that Austrian study?
Yeah. Basically, it's a document I found online about 2 or 3 years ago. It's classified as the guideline of the AMA. Unfortunately, that's not the American Medical Association. It's the Austrian Medical Association for the diagnosis and treatment of EMF-related health problems and illnesses. It basically defines the use of the EMFs that are out in the world today. It identifies them as a 21st century issue. And it also has some indications on the appropriate symptoms and treatment for the disease.
Well, we'll share a link to that online too. I hear you. I think it sounds like you're looking for a little more information, but we can include that in the comments as well. And also, if you'd like to share a little bit, like we've both been out, or you especially, you've been out measuring around cell towers, monopoles and cell towers in our community, and come back and you felt the symptoms. And I understand that we all are, we're all sensitive to this since we're all being impacted, but some feel it more. So some are more extra sensitive, but I've gotten vertigo from being in a light rail train at rush hour, coming back from a smart meter hearing. Virginia, I believe you might, we saw you there a couple years ago, but that was my first instance with I got home and I was so dizzy and nauseous and my extremities were tingling. So we both encounter that, but because it's cumulative, we do our best to kind of keep ourselves away from it. Like we don't go to concerts or out to eat much, or, we just kind of living as hermits a little bit, but it's too bad, but you kind of have to protect yourself that way. We don't have a smart meter. We've done our notice of liability. And so anyway, but you felt that too, Paul, right? You've come back from measuring cell towers, felt really tired.
Yeah, I found out there was a downside to the art of measuring EMFs from some of these cell towers in the local area. So you have to do it quickly and get out of there as fast as you can, for the most part. I've also done some research on some of the locations around the country that have had problems with behavioral issues, mostly school shootings for the most part, and finding out where all the antennas are. I think I shared this with Brian when I was doing some research for him on some of the measurements around the high school that he was talking about. it used to be a little bit easier, especially using the antenna search. It used to work a little bit easier with the Google search maps, but nowadays the maps themselves are being blotted out, so the ability to actually find the locations of the towers using that is getting more and more difficult. But you also find ways they can disguise the towers. Like when I checked, what was that? Parkland, Florida, where they had that shooting a couple of years ago. I would look around there and I couldn't find any antennas, obvious antennas anywhere around the schools. But when I checked another search engine that I have, I located two fairly large towers that are located dead center in the middle of two playgrounds on north and south of the school itself. And those are disguised as lamp poles within the park. And in each park, there are about anywhere from 4 to 6 playing fields where all the children are going all the time. And, if you don't know the towers are actually there, you don't know what to look for. I'm even finding some that are hidden in bell towers of churches. And when you use that app to drill down and find out what they're, you can look at the backyard of the church and find out it's also being used as a daycare center.
The next article that I'm going to post within a week or two, it's specifically addressing the radiation at a middle school, which is essentially right next to an elementary school. And there's also this toddler daycare right there as well. And the toddler daycare is at the foot of a water tower, and this water tower has 10 or 12 antennas on top of it. So it's going to be hitting this entire community. And if it's going to be anything like the last patch article I put online, I mean, it's going to generate a lot of views. There's some concern that among the people I work with that patch is going to disallow me from posting on there anymore because they're not sure what this stuff is and it's disrupting the community and all that. And my response is that Pat should be thanking me for all the traffic that I'm bringing to their website. So I'm not too worried about it.
I have a collage, and one of my favorite ones, so many times on the sports playing fields, like the football fields, they'll have the big stanchion banners, like I say, Cougars, and this sign. It looks like a sign, and it is, but it's also a cell tower usually. And you may have heard of many instances of football players, especially, just dropping on the field. And wonder why, they're so confused. But there are chimneys, cell towers disguised as chimneys on schools. Many of you may know Virginia. She was featured in Take Back Your Power film, and but she's just such a strong advocate for all of this. And I had the pleasure of having a recorded conversation with her a few months ago. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, we're getting 9 new cell towers being installed in our town. We've got about 130,000 full-time residents, and it's a real concern because there's a cell tower that it's just now being installed, and this thing is like 200 or 300 feet tall, and it's disguised as a pine tree, but it is the most hideous looking pine tree you've ever seen, and it's right behind $1 million homes, and the people are, I was telling Christine, besides themselves. They don't even know what to do about it.
PTA seem to be like a kind of wet fish. There's only so much they can hear, and they're not really action taking. They're quite willing to spend loads of money on buying infertility pads for the kids, for the classroom, and they just don't understand the reasons why they're not helpful tools in the classroom.
Isn't PTA a little more political than the PTCOs, as I understand, as far as an organization? Lori, are you familiar with that, the difference between the PTCOs and PTAs? And
in dealing with other environmental issues in the past, which I've done, PTA is very political. They really don't want to involve themselves beyond maybe funding new things for the classroom. And as you said, it's so ironic, the kinds of things that they're funding are exactly the things that we're concerned about, or that I'm concerned about, definitely as a teacher. And, it's very frustrating for me as a teacher to know that my first order of business is to protect the kids that are with me. That I take that job very seriously. And so when that's my first order of business, first you protect them, then you teach them. When that's your first order of business and you go through the chain of command to say, here are my concerns with what we're doing to kids, and you get nowhere, and you have just really amazing colleagues and people that are intelligent, really intelligent, the critically thinking individuals that don't quite get it. It's beyond frustrating, because it really does take a unified voice for anything to happen among teachers. And the catch-22 is that, of course, as teaching has evolved since I first began 24 years ago, our evaluations depend upon our use of technology. And so it's just this frustrating circle of, no win for those of us who are on this page and understand what we're doing to these kids and trying to speak to the kids. I teach high school, and so I'm very direct about the concerns, and that's where my idea of, with you, Christine, when we spoke, of the education in the hands of kids. They know. If you're able to get them away from being so in love with their tools, they understand the side effects. When you start listing the side effects, they can recognize them. And not only the side effects, biophysically, as we've discussed, but just the social side effects, they're on that page. And so I really do think, Brian, of course, speaking to your point, not the little ones. We're here to protect the little ones. But as kids are learning how to advocate for themselves, I think such an important piece of critical thinking is to lay out the facts for them and allow them to be the voice. Because I think that it's when these kids start saying, stop frying me in my classroom, that we're really going to have some leverage and ability to take hold of the situation. But at this point, I'm just frustrated,
There's student councils. It seems like there could be student councils in these different schools that could be put together and just kind of lay it out there for a project for the students to, here's an idea. This is a proven problem, a health impact that's happening without your consent. What do you think about it? Do you think it's important enough to address it amongst yourselves? And I think that might be fairly interesting. And I kind of wanted to invite Kathy. I'm not that she needs an invitation, but she has such a rich background, and she's a nurse and into alternative medicine. And I'm sure you have lots of good opinions and ideas here that you might like to share at this point.
I feel your pain, and I've been there. And I've been involved with EMF studies since the mid-'80s. And my husband and I had a chiropractic clinic, and we had tri-field meters that we would lend out to all of our patients. So that was our way of educating them, and they would tell their friends and their family members. But in the about 1996, when my daughter was in kindergarten, is when it became very real for us, and she would come home sick all the time, severe headaches, migraines, anxiety. She couldn't sleep. It's her immune system just seemed to take a hit constantly. And Brian, I can relate, and Nichola, I take meter in there. And this was before even the big concern with radio frequencies. This was just EMFs. The computer labs that had, 25, 30 computers in there, and all the blue light, the fluorescent lights in the classrooms, etc., all the dirty electricity that we found on the meters. So anyway, we ended up homeschooling her. And I was later then involved in, we homeschooled her until she was in 6th grade. And then when we brought her into the middle school, that was when the cell tower issues became a big deal. And her school ended up putting a cell tower on the property. And that was despite newspaper articles and campaigns, etc., that I was involved in, my husband and about 15 other healthcare professionals in the area. So I have found over time, and since then I worked at a hospital. And so that was where I had the arena that was much more open to educating the community about EMFs and radio frequencies. I was working with expecting and new parents and grandparents, and they are very, very in tune to this. They want healthy babies. They want healthy children. And so they were extremely open. I had the hospital purchase meters, and we would lend those out to patients, to family, to grandparents, and it created quite a movement of awareness in the community. And I always found that schools were not as open, they were more political. However, groups that you might consider looking at and talking with are your Elks clubs, your Exchange Club, your Shriners clubs. These clubs are populated by individuals that are a little bit older. They've got a little bit more time to devote to doing some research, because as we all know, teachers, their plates are so full. Administrators, their plates are full. But when you start getting very concerned parents and grandparents involved who have some time and who play a part in helping fund educational programs for the kids in the schools, they can make some inroads for you. So Nichola and I have been working together with the science exhibit, and that was something we did. We educated thousands of children as well as parents and grandparents. It would come through the hospital, and we would set up different electronic devices with tri-field meters as well as RF meters. And I totally agree, Lori, that children are incredible. They would bring their parents over and start educating their parents about, wow, this microwave, look, the waves go through my body, they go through the wall, and etc. So it was very, very eye-opening. So we started, and this is just a thought as well, it worked very well in Arizona, where I was involved in this. It was just a huge thing for me. We had it as part of all of our childbirth education programming. So all expecting new parents and grandparents were educated about this. We created, with the help of collaboration with some of these outside groups like the Elks Club, foundations that are associated with hospitals that often provide grant monies for educating. We did a infant safety outreach program. Now, the main emphasis of that was CPR and first aid for babies, but we just happened to slip in a lot of information and created displays that educated them about EMF. So I would bring a microwave, I'd bring clock radio, I would bring cell phones, and gave all of the people, including the children that attended, the babysitters that attended, the opportunity to see that, wow, these things are real. You don't see them, but they definitely have an impact. So I think we just have to be very, very creative. And sometimes we have to go in through back doors, and we have to find out what those back doors are. But we're very blessed. I mean, I was involved before we had social media. And we've got social media now, and so the word can get out so much faster. So you all have huge hearts, and you're, like myself, so concerned. And I know we can join together, and we can do some wonderful things together. And thank you, Christine, for making this possible.
I think we're pretty savvy and getting more and more all the time, more awake. And the more we can join together, the stronger we'll be. So that's what it's all about. And anybody have any final comments that as we wrap this up? And thank you so much. I feel like this was pretty solid. Brian, yes, sir.
All right, so a couple of things. Yes, I would like to thank you for putting this together. It's been great. From my perspective, I'm not going to be able to affect change in a lot of people's minds. I think it really needs to be a crowdsourced effort. We have to get other people engaged. People aren't going to be engaged unless they feel the inner desire to do it themselves. You could present people with all the different scientific research, but unless they really feel it inside and get it, then it's going to be hard to motivate people. But I think that the more people are just talking about it, even if it's not necessarily positive, but just if it stays in the discussion, that it's something that's in the background that people are aware of, and it's not just the crazy parent who shows up at the PTA meeting, right? That's why I think stumbling upon this idea of to me, it comes down to pressure. Who are we putting pressure on? I mean, right now we need to be putting pressure on the schools and really our legislators. But you know, you and I and the folks in this group, it's like just even collectively, we're not going to be able to do much. We really need just the entire community to do that. And I think, you know, narrowing in on how it's affecting the schools, that's what I'm currently focused on because it seems to be working. I think once I've exhausted that effort, I think what I'm going to be moving on to, which is basically doing the same type of thing, reporting, but saying with the group that I've been working with, there's been a lot of talk about how a proposed cell tower could affect property values of the surrounding neighborhood. And boy, let me tell you what people are sensitive to are property values, right? So one idea I had is going around the community and just documenting where measurements are high. Hey, guess what? There's a Dunkin' Donuts right here, or there's you know, the grocery store, whatever it may be.
Starbucks.
Mm-hmm. You know, places where people spend a lot of time every day, that sort of thing, saying, hey, you might want to avoid this area because it's got high wireless radiation readings. And, you know, bringing the focus on how it affects business and property values. I mean, I just think that's going to get people moving. That's going to get people excited because there's going to be people who don't believe the science and who argue back, but then there's going to be one or two people who are like, hey, this is something I should consider.
Great point. And Virginia, like you mentioned, that community of $1 Million Homes in Port Collins or that area.
Oh, they're very aware, and I'll tell you, they just don't even know what to do to just abandon their homes, or they're going to lose all kinds of money. And they know if they put them up for sale, nobody's going to want to buy them. I mean,
that'll get attention, huh?
Absolutely. And I also wanted to tell everybody thank you, especially Kathy, for the Elks Club and the Shriners Club. Those are good.
Great ideas.
You know, that just gives people, I never even thought about that before. Mm-hmm. I try and do something every day, and that's all I try to encourage others to do, because, you know, it's going to take a group effort, and we just have to keep going with it.
I can say that Virginia is amazing. She sends me so many links that they're so wonderful. And like I tell her, I say, I wish I could make the time to focus on these. Or right now I kind of file them away. I glance at the titles for the most part, but she's just amazing. What a powerhouse she's been. And everyone, Nichola gave so many great ideas what to do in the communities. They make so much sense. And, you know, and Lori, like you'd suggested, like the good old fashioned snail mail, and it's great. So I just think that it's really wonderful that we could get that. And I'm wondering, what would you think of, I know that I'm not a fan, I'm not impressed at all with mainstream media, because we know who owns them, and that they, you know, we all have the spoon-fed, cherry-picked information that they want us to have. But, you know, how about maybe looking if we can find a reporter in our local station that's been a little bit more progressive, that maybe we could invite them to sit in on one of these meetings. If no other, maybe just to listen. Like, they don't have to even reveal themselves necessarily, but they could maybe see if they've got a story that they could, be part of being a hero in the community if they break that story. And all we need is a few of those mainstream media. So many people they're so convinced that, in between all the Ask Your Doctor ads, that, we've got all these, we got to catch the news because that's where it is, If we could get somebody coming through, like even Tucker Carlson's coming through Fox News with more and more truths these days, and he's, I kind of pick and choose what I hear from him, but he's talked about this issue, and he's invited people in to speak about that. And I think that dam is breaking a little bit, that maybe we could get in there. What do you think about mainstream media? No? Good idea, maybe?
Yeah. No, I've been trying to get my local paper to do the reporting that I'm doing right now. Like, I wish they would take the reins over, because as soon as an official, a well-regarded source, of news, what am I trying to say here? An accredited source, I'd say, takes the reins over, then there's really nothing much else we could do. From my perspective, it's about making as much noise as possible, and there's only so much that I could do. So that's why I'm kind of, hoping the community does it, for me, not for me, but for, the well-being of all of our children. So I think that if enough noise is made, then maybe they'll start catching on and start doing reporting on it. But if it feels like, and maybe this is just the cynic in me, so forgive me, but if it feels like this is something that someone brings up and then it goes away, then, newspapers right now, I think they'll probably just err on the side of caution and say, the research is questionable, and just leave it at that, and not really take any sides on the matter, because,
I think you're right. I think a good case in point is that I think, Virginia, you share this with me too, that, for example, doing stories about screen time, about the issues of spending too much time on the screen, it's more politically acceptable than more controversial, the radiation coming from wireless devices. They don't tend to want to venture into those waters that aren't safe. They have their own reputation. They might jeopardize their jobs, but like you say, if there's enough noise in the community where they're forced to address it, there was a protest at City Hall, all these people, so they're going to cover it because it's got a lot of attention. So, but usually don't they try to spin it like, well, the evidence isn't clear, and this is the, controversy here, and there's all sorts of theories involved. We can't validate. They kind of CYA a lot,
Actually, Chris, just to let everybody know, we have a Fox News affiliate here in our area. It's on 600 a.m. in the mornings, and his name's Jimmy Lake. I think you can hear it nationwide, but I have his personal email, and I send him all the information, and pretty often now he complains about cell phones in the schools and trying to get our kids away from this stuff. And he actually says, I have a person that sends me lots of stuff on this. So I know that he's aware of me, and he's actually read some of my emails. So don't, just because somebody isn't emailing you back or anything, sometimes if you can connect with some of these news outlets, they will take your information, and I think a lot of them will read it. And my idea is, if they can't even talk about it on air, they can share it amongst their colleagues, and again, it spreads it.
Yeah, good point with that. And Laura, you mentioned about being in the schools, and I know that unfortunately, like you say, that first you have to protect the children and then you teach them. And I even flirted with the idea of running for school board. in our local area. We're planning on moving in the next year, so I didn't think that made a whole lot of sense, but I did go down to check into what's involved, what would I need to file, what kind of things would I need to come to. But I looked about what applies for the school board, and their banner on their website is school board. It's all about the children. I thought, the heck it is, really? It just seems so sad. But I thought, well, maybe I could make a difference from getting in there. But then I believe that they watch your every move, that you can't, they'll only let you talk so much. I guess you kind of have to say, okay, well, what are you going to talk about? Well, we need to approve those words first, and then you can go out. You can't just go, blah, I don't know. What do you think about that, Lori? About the school boards? And
Well, I do. I think that in private meetings, I know that they can go ahead and talk about anything that they'd like to talk about, but they do have to provide some kind of unified front in the public aspect of their meetings. And that was my experience with, again, another environmental issue that I was involved in a long time ago. But it's the same thing, just the political ties and obligations that school boards have. And so, in our district, they're mandating the use of Chromebooks district-wide. Isn't it great? And, I wonder what kind of contract was signed for the use of the mandated Chromebooks.
With Google.
Correct. And so, there are just so many moving pieces behind the scenes. I think one of the things that, in all environmental issues, when we address some of these concerns with people who might not be as aware as, perhaps this group is, of, environmental synergy, the things that are toxic and become more toxic when you put them together. You have to first convince people that the way that they're living their own lives needs to be re-examined. And so I think there's this defense mechanism for a lot of people, because it causes them to have to say, but wait, I'm fine, until you start maybe addressing some of the symptomology, and then, they start putting pieces together. So this concept of, it's about the kids who can't speak for themselves. And, with my colleagues, I try to remind them, and I don't say as much about it anymore, because I'm that person on my campus. I'm the crazy one who is worried about the pesticides, and yeah, I'm that person. But I try to remind them that no one asked us our permission. I did not sign up to work in this environment. I'm not, I know Starbucks is all wireless, but that's not how I was hired. I was hired to do a job that didn't require being radiated, and being exposed to what I perceive as really harmful. And so then the catch-22 becomes, well, I am gainfully employed now. Do I quit my job and lose my retirement? And this becomes the problem for teachers. To what end do you, start being the minority voice? And I think for a lot of people, that's problematic. And so, for me, I think it's mandatory. We have to do this.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if it's a national thing or not. Lori, you could answer that question. But I see that teachers have been on strike for their pay. Certainly around here in Colorado, I don't know if they're too, but, if they can join forces to make a lot of noise, as Brian says needs to happen about the pay, why can't they be convinced that we are being irradiated and we weren't hired to teach in this sort of environmental place where we're being irradiated, and we're going to go on strike until they wire the devices for ourselves and our children. So that's more important. I think as long as you have your health, you don't, it doesn't really matter how much money you make if you don't have your health, is what I'm awkwardly trying to say. And do you think that's naive? I've been called Pollyanna before. Do you think that's naive to think that that could happen?
I don't think so. But as I already said, then you have to convince all of these folks that their own lives and the way that they use these devices in their own homes, and the way they proceed with the way they're living, might need to be re-examined for their own sake.
Yeah, it's holding a mirror up to them, so they have to examine their own behavior. If they're being a good model for their children, how much are they using their devices? So,
correct.
Wow. Yeah, I know there's solutions in here, you guys, and I think we made some really great progress. So it kept you a long time. Any last words? And I'll be quiet and let you speak before we wrap this up.
Chris, I think a lot of this comes down to, our kids getting a fair education, which they aren't. They can't even think straight. A decent environment for them to go to school. This also affects people. I mean, if you really think about it, what about fair trials? I mean, these judges and lawyers, I mean, this just affects the whole gamut of groups. I mean, I don't know what to do, but like I said, I think little by little, if you start making enough noise, then, and I've noticed, I've been doing this for 10 years, and every year something comes out that is more on our side over this stuff. So I'm going to stay positive, and I want everybody else to stay positive and just try and do whatever you can.
Hey, I'd just like to quickly respond to what Lori was talking about and the challenges that she's facing. One person from the group that I work with locally here is a teacher at, I guess it's more like a creative arts type of school. I'm not sure if it's strictly a public school or not, but she raised the wireless concerns to her superiors, and they just basically told her to shut up about things. And she kept on raising the issue, and to the point at which they were getting so annoyed by it that they were like threatening to fire her.
Yes.
So she just shut up about it. So I mean, if you're the lone voice, it's hard, and that's why you have to get support. And teachers, they kind of feel like they're stuck, and probably the principal too that I spoke with feels like she's stuck. I literally said, Principal so-and-so, what is your response to this? And she said, I cannot respond to it. I cannot comment on it one way or the other. And so they're just so locked into, what they're being told to do that, there's not much that they can do. So this person who's in this group out here, she actually asked me, hey, can you come take measurements where I work? Because if I speak out anymore, I'm going to get in trouble. And so I said, yeah, I'll come and do it. I mean, I'm not going to get in trouble, so let me just go do it. And, it's hard when you have a teacher like yourself who's sympathetic towards the cause, but there's really not much that they can do aside from maybe just trying to convince, a couple of their coworkers or something. It is really about making noise. And if there's enough noise being made, then people will start paying attention.
Well, and I have worked my way up the chain of command in, starting on site, and then, up the chain of command with the superintendents. And the next stop would be at a board meeting, which is a very unpopular thing for a teacher to do, but it's still an option. Have done it before, don't mind doing it again. But it's very interesting. I, in writing, asked for some very specific answers to questions, and they just ignore you as if you never asked these questions. For example, when you came in with the wireless, did you ever take any measurements? Here are mine. What do you have to say about it? And, the answer is no, they don't go and take any measurements. And I said, well, how do you know it's safe if you don't go back and take any measurements? Could you please now take measurements? Hire somebody to come in, an environmental specialist, so that I can know I'm working in a safe environment. And no answer was ever forthcoming yet.
Thanks for that. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much. Sweet dreams to everybody.